Okay, John, thanks very much for joining us. So, what are you reading? Or do you listen to podcasts? Do you do YouTube? What's your forte?
A wee bit of podcasting and reading. So I guess I'll start with the podcasting. At the minute, I'm listening to a bit of a mix of some business stuff and some not so businessy stuff. I've been listening to Talking Sopranos pretty much on and off for since the two guys that do it started. So it's two of the cast members have been doing it and going through each episode. And going through each episode, they're bringing on a guest from the show to talk about it at the start. Then they're kind of going through the episode. So I think they're on season 4 now. So I'll probably listen to 50 or 60 episodes. I don't know, something like that. And so anybody who's a Sopranos fan, it's a really interesting, I guess, an interesting take on the show from the inside. So they've got most of the main characters have been on who are still alive, and kind of just hearing the stories of how the characters came into being, the personalities behind it and all that stuff. So it's quite an interesting insight into what seems to be a show that everyone has never has failed to live up to afterwards, in terms of that's most people would say it's probably, if not the best TV show of all time. It's in the conversation for the top 3 or top 5. So it's quite interesting that for someone who's been in those shows, that's a hard thing to follow up on when in essence you've been involved in creating one of the great masterpieces of your time. How do you follow that? So, but it seems like they were one big massive family who drank massively together, had the crack and enjoyed it. And I think that really comes through. And I guess in the show, they seem to manage to get lots of characters who kind of either lived in the same area and knew each other, or grew up together, or grew up near each other. And it's an interesting view into the Sopranos and the history of it.
And what's it called? Talking Sopranos?
Yeah, so it's Christopher Moltisanti, who's the wee guy everyone will remember from Goodfellas, who gets Spider in Goodfellas.
Yep.
And Bobby Bacala, who's the much larger guy in Sopranos. So the two of them do it together and interview lots of people from the show. So really interesting and slightly different. I think it'll only work in lockdown because some of the episodes are 2 hours long. So and it's every week it comes out. So wow. Sometimes they spend half an hour talking about restaurants they both eat in New York, and other times it's really on the show. So I think that one for me is just as a massive Sopranos fan, it's been good to kind of just go back through the history of how things happened, and it's interesting insight actually into how TV shows are made, and how the Sopranos was probably the first TV show in the States that really changed the whole dynamic in terms of television. Of actually, it wasn't the same kind of model that TV shows had been in the past, and David Chase, who was the kind of the brains behind it, really did something different. I guess that today we take it for granted with a lot of things we see on Netflix and Amazon and all those kind of streaming platforms. But I think The Sopranos was the first show that really, it wouldn't have worked on network TV at the time because of the language and the nudity and the I guess the violence that was in it. And I think that was one of the things that I thought really fascinating. There was a couple of conversations about some of the more violent moments in the show, and the public outcry about that. And actually, the guy that created it basically said that's interesting, but we have to remember that this is a group of guys in the mafia, so they can't all be great crack and fun people to be around all the time. The reality is these kind of things happen during it. So that's a really interesting one for anybody who loves The Sopranos and has got a huge amount of time in their hands. It's kind of taking over my life sometimes, but yeah. And the other one I've been listening to is Louis Theroux's Lockdown podcast, which I think is brilliant. I don't know if you've heard any of it.
I haven't, but a friend of mine I go walking with the old time was saying he's glued it and I should get on it. I mean, he just said the standard's really good, it's really high quality.
I think the standard's really good for the episodes where he knows the person. I think when there's a couple of them where he doesn't know the person at all, and it's a bit more like gone through their career. Yeah. Whereas the people that he knows, he's getting real real kind of nuggets of information that you wouldn't have heard before. So aside from Ruby Wax, who seems to absolutely hate him, and yeah, and more so because they're both in the same, they were both in the same kind of area. But yeah, so it's really good from a business side of things. I always listen to How I Built This, which is really good stories of people who have founded massive companies like Dell Technologies and those kind of big name brands that people heard of. And I kind of love those because it reminds you that everybody starts a business from somewhere in someone's dorm room or in your parents' house or wherever. Every big business had to start at the very start with someone with an idea. And I really like those storytelling kind of podcasts that really get that kind of get to the real life bit of how tough it was to start a business.
And that's connected to, you work for Ulster Bank. So what's helping new businesses get off the ground? So what's your role within that?
Yeah, so my job title, nobody will probably understand. I don't understand it myself half the time, is Regional Ecosystem Manager. So really, we've been running a business accelerator for 5 years now in Belfast, part of a wider group of 12 accelerators. So we help everything from startups trying to get off the ground to established companies who want to scale their business. And if it sounds vague, kind of sometimes it is, because it's working with each business to see what's the big challenge for them and how do we support with that. So a startup getting off the ground may be challenging them on, is there an actual problem they're trying to solve, and is there a customer base for them? Whereas a more established company trying to grow from £2 or £3 million a year to £10 million a year may be more about the logistics and the background stuff and systems and processes and all that kind of thing. So it makes for interesting work, but no two days are the same, I think, is the honest reality.
It's a wide range of people you're dealing with. So it can be someone coming in wanting to start a tech firm who has never run a business, or someone coming in who has had 4 or 5 different businesses and wants to try something new.
Yeah, and we have everything from the wonderful ice cream chain Nugaletto, who were with us a couple of years ago, who came in wanting to kind of start to ramp up their operations and move out beyond the couple of locations they had. And then you have cyber businesses and security businesses that really are kind of ahead of the curve in terms of real technology stuff that isn't happening elsewhere in the world. So it can be anything. We've got the wonderful hot sauce company with probably my favorite main product in the world, Pain in the Hole. So if you're into hot sauces and you want to buy local, go Google Pain in the Hole hot sauce. It's a really good sauce.
And then, so you're usually looking at how to upscale.
Yeah.
Is that the main thing?
Yeah. I guess if you split it into 2 types of people, startups are by their nature something that people, you're making a leap and you're taking a bit of faith that what you think is going to happen will happen. So actually, a lot of that side of what we do is around focusing on understanding, does this person know what problem they're trying to solve? Because let's be honest, we all have a limited amount of money, unless you've created Facebook or you're one of the founders of Google. So when you spend money, you've got to have a driving factor to spend that money. And the reality is, a lot of people start a business with an idea which sounds great to them, and their family and friends tell them that's awesome. But actually, they don't hear the real life stuff, which is, will anybody actually spend money with you? Because, as much as Donald Trump proved so many things in 4 years, but, I think the common reality is most people are nice people. Most people aren't arseholes, and actually, and because of that, they won't always tell you the truth. So when people starting out in business go and ask someone, would you buy this? Most people say yes. Because it'd be awkward to say no, because then you're going to be asked, like, why wouldn't you spend money with me? And a lot of people hear that yes until they actually have a product or service. And then when someone goes to, right, where's all these people who said they'd buy this? Nobody really cares. And I think that's whether you're selling to a business or selling to a person, if what you're selling isn't fixing a need and a pain point, and isn't probably the biggest pain point you have right now, it's always going to be the thing that you'll think about next week or the week after or whatever. And so, unless you can figure out is this a big problem that someone has? And if it's big enough for people to really need to spend money on it, then you may well tickle along and get some business, but you're never really going to grow that enough. So I think that the kind of the early stage stuff is trying to understand, is there something there? I always look at it from three sides. Is the business, do people want what you have? Is it viable, and is it feasible? And by that I mean, like, can you do it? So if you want to fly people to the moon right now, technically you probably could, but but in reality, can you do this? So what do you charge someone for something? Is that going to be less than what you make from them? So can you make money from it? So for me, that's the sort of trifecta of a good sort of startup. Is there a real want for this from customers? Is it feasible for you to do, and can you make money from it? And if you need all three of those things, otherwise you kind of limp along and you don't ever get there. And I think that's when you surround yourself with people who tell you the positives and the things that you want to hear, then that means people tend to go on way too long without realizing this isn't going to happen. And
that's part of the role, is to kind of fast track people into breaking the idea down to go, here's reality. You could trickle along for 3 years, or you can just face the facts now, and this thing's not going to last more than a year. Or
because I'll never say to someone this isn't going to work, because let's be honest, if anyone out there listening to this is like me, the second someone tells you it's not going to work, you'll try harder to prove them wrong. So for me, when I look at a business and I think in my head that it's not going to work, I try and figure out why I think it's not going to work, and then challenge that person to kind of prove me wrong. So either they prove me wrong and I am wrong in that, which is great, because then there's a business there. But by going and taking those steps, it'll probably prove to that person that there isn't a business here, by looking at those things and making that call themselves. And I think that's the role for me, is never to say this isn't going to work. The role for me is to try and shine a spotlight on the areas where I think are the problems, and either that person can prove me wrong, which is wonderful when that happens, or they start to realize themselves, oh yeah, this isn't going to work because of these 3 things or these 5 things. Because let's be honest,
how much is it down to the person, the idea? Can you have the right person with the wrong idea? Can you have the wrong person with the right idea? Well,
if I don't have a pile of kites sitting in the house, but if I did, I would take the right person and the wrong idea every day of the week. Because the best idea in the world and the wrong person, it's never getting anywhere. Let's be honest. No one has never met someone who hasn't got a business idea. Ideas are 10 a penny. Execution is the thing that is the difference between really good entrepreneurs and not bad entrepreneurs, but unsuccessful entrepreneurs. So I would always take the person over the business idea if there was a choice of great person and rubbish idea, or great idea and rubbish person. Great person every day of the week, because no matter what type of business you're in, it all comes back to people. And that for me is the common denominator in everything. If I tap back into the Sopranos podcast, a lot of what they talk about, you can see that this worked because they got the right people involved. And had they had, the number of people who went for the Tony Soprano role, who are on the show in different guises, is probably 7 or 8. And when you look back, you go, yeah, none of those people would work in that role. And I think it's the same with this. Business always comes back to people, whether you're an ice cream store or you're a cybersecurity company. Like, it is people at its essence. And I think for me, that's why I would always go with the person over the idea.
Do you see set personality traits in the people who have been most successful in the Ulster Bank program, compared to those who are maybe not as successful, or is it just random?
I've always kind of likened it to a little bit like Father Ted. You've got in Father Ted, you've got like the different types of priests. You've got like the dancing priest and the the singing priest and the really boring priest and all that sort of stuff. And in reality, you can kind of break entrepreneurs down into a similar kind of pattern of, here's the types of entrepreneurs, because there are people who, me and you have talked a lot in the past about food and drink. I think 10, 15 years ago, when Gordon Ramsay and all those kind of TV chefs were really coming to the fore, lots of people wanted to be a chef because they thought it was cool. They didn't realize that actually, if you look at the likes of Johnny Lake, who's the head chef in the Merchant Hotel, from West Belfast, Johnny spent like his first year, 18 months, basically just cutting a carrot a certain way every day for a year, repetitive, boring, not exciting, not the Gordon Ramsay stuff, And the reality is it's not that exciting. And I think what we're experiencing the past 3 or 4 years is lots of people thinking entrepreneurship is cool and exciting. And it can be. It's a roller coaster, so it's nothing if not dull. But the reality is there's lots of people who are playing at it. And I guess by that I mean they're not, they're not really going, I want to create something that's going to be, something that I create that's there for the next 50 years. There's a lot of people just think it's cool and it's easy and it's fun, and it's none of those things. It's when you've exited and you look back, you might go, "Oh, that was great," but actually, it's tough, it's challenging. You don't have anyone to go to say, "Right, what's the answer?" Because especially if you've gone from working for someone to starting something, in reality, you've got to have the answers yourself. You've got to figure that out. So nothing is easy in entrepreneurship, and I always think of it as you're learning something new every day, but you've got a new challenge every day. So it's the same as 10, 15 years ago when people thought it was cool to be a chef, and then within 2 days of working in the kitchen, they realized, yeah, this isn't as exciting as it looks on TV. It's the same with entrepreneurship. People hear about the overnight successes of people who the big tech companies. Even if you look at the likes of locally, the company come up with the stuff for the sports. Now I'm going to forget the name of them. The track sports people when they're out on the pitch and stuff. I remember they got $1 billion contract with the US Soccer Federation, and people talking in the media about this overnight sensation. Nobody talked about the 5 years they were basically in a couple of bedrooms in Uri and all the struggle to get to the point they are. So I think everybody sees the stories of like the successful entrepreneurs who are living their best lives and with money to do whatever they want and all that stuff, but they don't see the 10 years or 15 years of pain that got to that point. And so everyone wants what I call the social media lens on it. Everyone wants the positives and none of the negatives, when actually the reality is it's mostly the hard stuff. And it is like
the
that.
headline people say as opposed to the backstory. Like it's
when you go on the Facebook, all you see is the great stuff. Nobody puts on the Facebook and says, "Oh, I've had a shit day today." Work's annoying.
By next week.
Yeah, none of the customers I spoke to today wants to buy my product. I'm running out of cash next week. Nobody writes that. They all show a picture of them making banana bread, or oh, look how awesome we are. And I think people see entrepreneurship as that bit, the lens of this is awesome, and don't see all the tough work that goes into, because the reality is, if you've got a really good idea, it probably hasn't been done before. And the really good ideas are things that half the people you talk to think you're absolutely bananas and mad, and the other half think you're a genius. So you kind of have that internal battle of, actually, is this something that's doable? You've got to have a lot of self-confidence and belief to actually keep pushing through with that. So I guess that was a long-winded way of pulling back to your original question, which is what makes a really good entrepreneur different. I think there's a couple of things. There's one or two things which I guess are not really within your control, or are to a certain degree, and that is the right time. So if I think about Christine Boyle from Synergy, for example, who does solar thermal panels, it's their right time, because climate and that focus is really massive right now, and so having a business that's just about the go to market with a product in that space at this point is really good, whereas 10 years ago, would that have been right? So I think timing plays its part, and that's not always something that you can control. But I think it's the person, it's the thing that you can't really put your finger on when you meet them, but you just know it. You know they've got the drive and determination, And I think it's, there's the podcast I listen to, How I Built This. The guy always asks a question: is it luck or is it hard work? And actually, I think the reality is we all have luck around us. The people who are looking for it grasp it and take control of it, and make the best of that opportunity. The people who don't see it or let the opportunity pass, the unlucky ones, are the people who just don't make the most of it. So I think there's a kind of, I think for me it's a balance between, is it hard work, is it luck? I think when you're working hard, opportunities start to present themselves to you, and it's about spotting them and actually grasping them rather than letting them pass you. So I think it's someone who works hard, and someone who just won't take no for an answer. I think the reality is, in startup world in particular, you're trying to convince people when there's a huge amount of risk in reality. So especially if it's an expensive product, let's be honest, if you're going to go and spend a lot of money on something and it's with a business that's been going 3 months or 6 months, like there's a fair degree of risk at that, especially if you're a large organization that's risk averse, for example. So you've got to be able to really convince someone that this is something they have to have, and the risk of you being a startup that could be out of business next month is worth taking versus, it's a bit like Mel Gibson and Braveheart, where he's wound everybody up and they're ready to go into battle. You kind of have got to convince your customers that, that this is something that you really need, but you've got to get in front of people. And that in itself can be challenging sometimes. And a lot of people, and this is, I think, where it comes back to that luck versus hard work. A lot of people will say, oh, look at that person. They managed to, like, how did they get that meeting with someone? Or how did they get in front of that person? I haven't heard any entrepreneur story where they just, they sent an email to Bill Gates and he replied, oh yeah, come for a meeting and we'll talk about buying your product. I think if you look at some of the great success stories, it's about somebody hustling their way into that, because that's what you've got to do. And I think there's a certain mindset you have to be able to hustle in that way. You've got to be able to work your way in somewhere when there isn't an option to get in there, and that's not something they teach you in school, or somebody can really go, here's a course on how to do this. But I think you've just got to be scrappy and go, right, if I can't get to this person in this way, how do I get to them? So, like, an example of that is when I ran my own tech startup and I was trying to get into someone in Uber. I didn't know anybody who knew the person. I just knew who I was trying to get to. They weren't connecting with me on LinkedIn. I couldn't find them. And so there's a website where you can go and type in an email address and it tells you whether it's true, whether it exists or not. And I just spent half a day typing in different permutations of the person's name and guessing. And eventually a little tick come up to say it existed. And went, right, okay. Next step, just send them an email, see what happens. So I think it's easy, and that's where the luck versus hard work comes in. So it would have been easy for me to say, I can't get to that person. But actually, because no one I know knows them, they won't connect with me on LinkedIn, I can't find their email address online or contact details, all that sort of stuff. But there's always a way. There's always a way to connect with someone. And I think the great entrepreneurs are the people who understand that it's not easy, but you've got to find a way to get in there and make it happen. And because there's no, like, the buck stops with you in reality. There's no one behind you to go, well, if you don't get that call or you don't get that meeting in about we'll sort it out. You've got to do it. So I think for me, it's definitely someone who just has that tremendous work ethic and understands that, opportunities are out there all the time. You just got to grasp them when you can.
Would you advise people before they start their own business to go and work for another startup in the same way you're talking about the chef there? Obviously, he went in and spent 2 years cutting cards and will then, work around different restaurants and get himself a point where he's a head chef somewhere, and at some point will obviously be thinking about starting his own restaurant, but will have, gone and got experience. Is that something that someone who's doing a startup should do, or would you say actually don't do that in case you win the wrong startup, just give it a lash yourself?
It's interesting because if you're not in the kind of startup world, most people see entrepreneurs as risk takers, and actually, I don't think that's true. I think entrepreneurs are calculated risk takers, and so I think for me that's another trait of a good entrepreneur versus one that's probably going to spin the wheels and not really get there. Is you're taking calculated risks. So I wouldn't necessarily go and work for another startup. What I'd say is before you take the leap of like if you've got a job and you're thinking, right, I'm going to go and do this, is go and talk to 100 people that you think are going to be your customers and get them to tell you about their biggest problem. And if what you're saying from that 100 people is back to what you think the product or service that you're going to produce is, right, you've definitely got something there. So you're kind of proving that, there's definitely a group of people who really need this. I think that would be where I would start, and find other entrepreneurs to start to become friends with, because it is lonely because you don't really know what you're doing most of the time. I think that's the challenge. If you're not comfortable being in that constant state of not knowing what the hell you're doing, like being an entrepreneur isn't for you, because it's constant. There is always something that this is the next thing that I don't know how to do, right? How do I figure it out? And if that's the kind of thing that makes you anxious and nervous and all that stuff, it probably isn't for you, because that's the reality. You're essentially a glorified problem solver 24/7, and the problems keep on coming. So I would say surround yourself with other entrepreneurs and go on to an accelerator or something like that, where you can find other people who know what it's like, because your family won't know, your friends won't know, and most of the time they'll think you're playing at it, and they'll be going, yeah, you'll get a job soon. I think that if you're better to just surround yourself with people who really understand what it's like and have been through the process. So when you're having a rubbish day, they can have a chat with you, and they'll kind of understand and empathize with you of why it is so hard. Whereas most of the people who haven't been through this will just go, yeah, just get a job. It's easier.
And tell us this:
that's
are most businesses now switching to some form of online business just due to what's happened? Is there any businesses that prior to COVID were just trickling along and doing okay, but because of this lockdown, it's near happened for you, have gone to the roof, or what's the?
I think it's certainly especially in the first 6 months of lockdown last year, or first 6 months of COVID, I think definitely there was a lot of retail stuff and online retail that did a lot better than they expected last year. So certainly there's a lot of that. A lot of businesses that we work with that were primarily online businesses anyway, or sold online mostly. Like that really ramped up for them, and I think that that type of business is a real positive. I think the challenging businesses were those types of businesses that were trying to create a product or service that they would sell B2B to large organizations, because most large organizations in reality have kind of went, right, just put the brakes on all of this stuff and we'll come back to it in 6 months or 9 months when things have calmed down a bit. But there's definitely been businesses like Trimedical that do non-touch thermometers for hospitals, and businesses like that have, given the current climate and what they offer, is clearly a well-needed thing. So it's I guess for me it's been a bell curve of businesses. You've got some that haven't worked out and have either closed down or within the hibernation, some that have made a huge amount of money based on what they sell right now, and then most people in the middle kind of just hoping to get through lockdown and hoping at some point they reopen again.
Yeah. How do you think this is going to affect? Obviously, one of your other guys is you've been a food blogger for many years. Are we going to see the end of fine dining, do you think, or will it just become a higher ticket price thing or a more exclusive thing? Any ideas?
Do you know what I find interesting with last year is that it really shook up restaurant owners in a way that I don't mean that restaurants haven't really changed, but like they haven't really changed in many years, and nobody would have wanted this to happen to anyone, because I think it will kill a lot of businesses off in the restaurant space, especially in the next couple of months, which is a terrible thing. And I think we'll see a lot of staff moving into different areas, and actually when restaurants do reopen again, it'll probably be quite challenging to get good staff again, because I think some people will probably move on to different roles. I hope that doesn't happen, but it was interesting to see the move to like at home and that kind of stuff last year, which I think was a different model. Like, for example, at Christmas, instead of cooking this year, I just got an at home box for us. Save all the hassle. Probably you spend as much as you would with your Christmas shop anyway. And I think like everything that happens, there is always some innovation that comes from it, and there will always be a few entrepreneurs who kind of see, right, here's a gap for me in what we're doing. I don't know if I've seen a huge amount of stuff happening from the restaurant trade, and in terms of that at the minute, but it's a lot to be dealing with. You're open again. Oh no, you're not open again. Government hasn't exactly covered itself in glory in supporting the hospitality industry. In fact, they've probably been one of the worst hit with this. So it's challenging to say you should be innovative in times when you've bought a load of produce to open this week, and then suddenly you're told you're not opening. And I don't necessarily think that we'll see fine dining become more exclusive. I guess let's be honest. If you wanted to go fine dining in Belfast, the reality is you would probably be spending £200 for a night out. So I guess it's already pretty exclusive. In reality. But I think in about 18 months' time, I think we will see some interesting things come out of this, and some different ways of people experiencing food at home that they wouldn't necessarily have experienced up until now.
So what was that home box you got at Christmas? How did that work out, or what?
So I got Kobe's at home box for us, and you pick it up, and then you've got all the stuff. You just bung it in the oven. So it's right, starter time. Put this in for 10 minutes, take it out again. So for me, it took away the pain of, like, normally I'm spending 6 hours in Christmas cooking, and then it may or may not work out. Half the time, probably not. But for me, it was interesting that I probably would have spent a similar amount of money on my Christmas dinner, and this was actually, I had to drive down and pick it up, get it put in the boot, but it probably in total was about 15-20 minutes of work for me on the day to get the dinner out there, and it was the same quality of dinner you would get in a restaurant, and you were getting it at home. Like, what's not to like there? But I think the biggest challenge is survival right now for restaurants. There's not a huge amount of anything else people could do right now other than figure out how to get through the next 6 months. When will restaurants reopen again? How safe will it be? All those things. It's a tough time for the food business. But I think it's interesting to see people like restaurant reviews suddenly changing to book reviews, and things like that. And here's the book I would look at this week in terms of what food you're cooking, rather than here's a restaurant I would go to. I read a restaurant reviewer that I normally read a couple of weeks ago coming out and saying, here's a link, you should buy this crispy duck. It'll come in the post, and it will be the best crispy duck you've ever had in your life. So there are things that are happening that I guess would someone have thought before, what, I'll spend 30 quid for someone to post me a duck, and then I'm going to stick in the oven and have a crispy duck feast? Probably not, but I think, the last year with at home boxes and things like that, I think it's changed customers' way of thinking on all this stuff, and our customers are now more open to doing something different, whether that's I know Caroline from who does the food tours here, has switched to doing like stuff at home with cocktails and making cocktails and things like that. I think there are different experiences now that people can enjoy and are more open to than they would have been 2 years ago. Because I think 2 years ago some of this stuff was happening, but it was a niche thing that kind of really, it was it was on the edge thing that nobody really thought about. Whereas now, most people, excuse me, yeah, it's an option now to go, well, if we're going to have a dinner party at home and have some people over, do you spend all the money trying to make something fancy and make an arse of it, and and spend the whole night kind of cooking, or do you just pay a bit of money to get food that would be cheaper at home than going out to a restaurant, and you can bring your own drink, and you have a really nice meal. You don't spend that much time doing it, and it's a great meal. What's not to like about that? If you can afford to do it.
So it's really about how, the nearest way of bringing that restaurant experience into your house.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is the restaurant experience in your house. I suppose we're all used to getting takeaways, but everyone up until last year was used to pizza, Chinese food, Indian food. That's about it. Whereas now you're saying, well, actually, that restaurant that you really like, you could get something at home. You don't have to, even if you've got young kids, trying to get out for a night is sometimes problematic. So
I suppose that the babysitter and the cost of taxis alone could pay for pretty good food, like.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like 30 quid round trip taxi fare. That's a lot of money to spend before you even get out of the house. So it's interesting. I think the sad part is that a large number of restaurants in Belfast in the north won't be here in 6 months' time, and that's the biggest problem in this. So I think what I would say to people now is, if you have disposable income and you have money, like, try and support those businesses that you would have supported in normal times. And actually, even if it's, I'm like yourself, I'm a big coffee fan. So even if it's, ordering a couple of bags of coffee from established, which are, not the same price as buying them in the supermarket, but, those small things will help keep those businesses going because they employ local people and they've a lot of mouths to feed. So for me, it's when can I spend money with a small business here that will help see them through the next couple of months, because if we can get as many of those businesses, or the likes of Bourne Seafood, who you can go and pick up seafood from them at the tail end of the week every week, those small things, whilst aren't massive changes for us as customers, will help those businesses to get through the next couple of months and to survive, I guess, and then to come back out fighting when they can reopen.
Yeah. I mean, there's certain things. I mean, obviously, the event land, live music and theatre and stuff can't open either, same as restaurants. But I'm not quite sure whether you can create that experience at home, because the experience is being in a room full of people. So as much as there's been some really good stuff that people have come up with and made, and put online or done live streams, it's just there's something about being in a room of 200 or 1,000 people that creates an atmosphere. I'm not sure whether it's possible to create that atmosphere at home. So they would be very much in the same boat as restaurants. A lot of them aren't going to survive. So it'll be interesting to see what way that pans out,
Yeah, I think that's probably the slight difference for restaurants than theatre is. Yeah, I think what the last year has taught us actually is that a lot of what we do socially is around that buzz of being around other people, even if those people aren't people you're actually like one-to-one interacting with. Actually, it's about being in a pub and the buzz and the noise and the lights and all those different things, that all the different senses that we think. I guess we've always looked at it as it's going to the pub with your mates or going for dinner with your friends, and that's the thing. But actually, it's all the stuff that goes around that we don't necessarily that we took for granted, I guess, up until last year. And I think that's where theatre and restaurants are different. You can create some degree of atmosphere having dinner at home if you've got a nice dinner and you can stick some loud music on or calming music, depending on the type of music or type of meal you're having. So you can create some sort of buzz around that. Whereas theatre, you're watching something and you're fixating on that group of people and what they're doing, and so it's not the same. Whereas with food, you're getting involved and you're making stuff. It's a bit like when the cake boxes first come out, where suddenly you didn't need to be a pastry chef. you just got a box in the shop, you put some water in it and bunged it in the oven, and it made people feel like they were chefs.
Yeah.
When in fact you're just basically firing some water into something. At home boxes are kind of like that. It's making you feel like you're producing the same quality of food that a restaurant is without needing the skill. Whereas I don't think that in that kind of that space of theatre and that kind of thing that we've really seen, is there something that allows you to get that involved that makes you feel part of it? And I think that's possibly the thing that's different about the two industries that makes it much more complicated from a theatre perspective to actually create an experience at home that's different for people.
Yeah. So do you think in the coming year you'll see an increase in people coming to Ulster Bank for the business support that you provide, just because they're going, right, well, we've got to do something? Does the times like this create more entrepreneurial spirit than pre this? Or
I think the common reasons that people become entrepreneurs are through necessity. You've lost your job and you go, what do I do? And if you can't get another job, a lot of people come to it through, right, I'll just do my own thing. And I think we will definitely in 2021 see an influx of entrepreneurs who will do new and unique and different things, because the reality is lots of people have lost their jobs because of what's going on. And by that, I definitely think we'll see a massive increase in entrepreneurs in 2021 and 2022. And that hopefully will be good for innovation, and will things that we maybe would never have seen before will happen because of that. But yeah, it'll be an interesting time. I think the best entrepreneurs are people who sniff out that there's an opportunity. And I think especially here in the north with Brexit, I suppose I always look at it like everyone has a set of friends that the man or the woman who just moans about everything and everything's against them, and the world's the world's out to get them. Everything is a problem. And then the opposite side of that is the kind of more eternal optimist who always sees the good in things. I think really good entrepreneurs can spot that there's an opportunity and can grasp it. And I think especially now with Brexit's been a mess, but actually where we're located right now for Brexit, there will be opportunities for entrepreneurs, and that's the reality, because we're on an island with another part of the island that's in Europe, and so there's opportunity there. And I think I've listened to a couple of podcasts recently about the climate crisis. There's a really good one called How to Save a Planet, which kind of is really story driven around the challenges that the planet faces, but trying to bring it back into real life, because it's a very hefty and large challenge for anyone to try and fix themselves or for anyone to feel like they're making a difference. But for me, the biggest opportunity in business over the next 10 years is in sustainable and ethical businesses that can make a difference to the planet, because the next decade is the decade where either we look back and say, that's the 10 years that we started to reverse this and made a difference for this planet, or that was the 10 years where we didn't do it, and actually our grandkids and our great grandkids aren't going to are going to have challenges because of this. So I think there's massive opportunities out there always, and I think those great entrepreneurs just sniff out the opportunity and go for it. So yeah, I'd be surprised if we don't see a huge influx of people over the next year seeing some of those opportunities and taking the leap, because maybe they have lost their job, and maybe a restaurant doesn't reopen, or maybe they can't get a job for a couple of months and just go, right, I'm going to do it myself. So I think that we always see that in kind of waves, I guess, when something happens that causes people to lose their jobs, that you then see more people coming out and starting their own thing, because a startup or a business doesn't need to be something that's going to make 10, 20, 50, 100 million pound a year. Let's be honest, like most people, if you have a business that's making you 50 or 60 grand wages every year, for a lot of people that's great, and there's nothing wrong with it, and it's in your hands, and you control when you work, and all those things. So I think when we talk about business, we don't always necessarily mean like the next unicorn or whatever that is. It can be our economy is made up of lots of small businesses that do a really cracking job on their own, that are never going to be $100 million or pound a year businesses.
Yeah. Yeah, their expansion can only go to a certain point, and they're happy enough with that as long as it's paying the wages.
Yeah. Exactly. So so I think we'll see some interesting things come out of new entrepreneurs coming on the scene in the next year, and it'll be interesting to see what those things look like. But who knows?
That's the challenge.
You never know, Mick. You could be back doing something yourself again.
You never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to happen. Well, look, John, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Mick.